first thing I heard that Saturday morning was a pair of bolt cutters closing around the chain on my orchard gate. The second was Curtis Vale shouting, "Mrs. Harper, you have had enough chances to cooperate." The third was the sound of my lock hitting the gravel, and that was when I knew the man who had spent 2 years trying to buy my land had finally decided he did not need my permission anymore. My name is Ruth Harper, and back in the summer of 1995, I was 57 years old, widowed 6 years, stubborn enough to keep an old orchard alive by myself, and apparently living next door to a man who believed a homeowners association could make him king. I lived outside a little town called Marrow Creek, Indiana, where people knew your business before you had time to understand it yourself. My place was called Cedar Hollow Orchard, 23 acres of apple trees, a weathered cider barn, a small white farmhouse with a green metal roof, and a gravel driveway that had swallowed more pickup trucks than I could count. My husband Ray and I bought that place in 1968 when it was mostly weeds, 2 dead peach trees, and a barn full of raccoon droppings. We had no money, no real plan, and no business thinking we could make an orchard work. But Ray used to say that was exactly why it was worth trying. Everybody with good sense is already working for somebody else, he would tell me, grinning with dirt under his fingernails. That leaves the strange people to build something of their own. Ray was a strange person in the best possible way. He could fix an engine with a butter knife, grow tomatoes bigger than a baby's head, and make you feel like any bad day was just weather passing through. When he died in 1989, I did not sell the orchard because I was brave. I stayed because I did not know who I would be if I left. The house had his boots by the back door, his handwriting on the old feed invoices, his coffee stain on the workbench in the barn. Some places are more than property. Some places become the last proof that a life happened the way you remember it. For a few years after Ray passed, Cedar Hollow was quiet. I pruned trees, sold cider and apples out of a little stand near the county road, and tried to get through each winter without thinking too much about how loud an empty house can be. Then, in 1993, the old farmland east of me got sold to a development company out of Indianapolis. They called the project Meadowbrook Landing, which was a fancy name for a few dozen beige houses packed tightly around curved streets with decorative lamps, mailboxes that all matched, and little signs reminding people not to park overnight. The kind of place where every lawn looked like it had been trimmed with a ruler. At first I did not care. Their land was their land. Mine was mine. That seemed simple enough. But there are people who see a fence and assume it was put there because nobody has explained the rules to them yet. Curtis Vale was one of those people. Curtis was the president of the Meadowbrook Landing Homeowners Association, though he introduced himself more like he had been appointed governor. He was in his mid-40s, always wore pressed khaki pants, even on weekends, and had the sort of haircut that looked like it had never been touched by wind, sweat, or common sense. He drove a dark blue Buick LeSabre, kept a leather folder under his arm, and spoke in that careful, polished tone some men use when they want to sound reasonable while saying something rude. The first time he came to my place, he stood at the end of my driveway and stared at my old cider barn for a long time. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "I hope you will not take this the wrong way, but your property creates a visual concern for the residents of Meadowbrook Landing." I looked at him, then I looked at my barn. It was old, yes. The paint was faded. The roof had needed patching since the previous fall, but it was solid, it was clean, and it had survived more storms than Curtis Vale had opinions. "A visual concern?" I asked him. He smiled like he had expected resistance. "The barn is visible from several homes along Linden Circle. We are trying to maintain a certain standard in the community." I remember wiping my hands on my apron because I had been sorting apples all morning. "Curtis," I said, "this barn was here before your community had a name, before those homes had carpet, and probably before half the people who live there knew what a homeowners association was. It is not going anywhere." His smile stayed in place, but something colder showed up behind it. "I think you will find that cooperation benefits everyone." That was the first warning. I did not understand it yet, but it was a warning. A week later, I received a letter in my mailbox with the Meadowbrook Landing letterhead at the top. It said my roadside apple stand was causing traffic congestion near the development entrance. The next letter said the old tractor behind my barn was an eyesore. The one after that said my orchard dogs were barking after dark and disrupting the peace. Then there was one about my scarecrow. I wish I was kidding about that. Curtis sent me a written complaint about a scarecrow wearing Ray's old denim jacket. According to the letter, it was visible from a walking trail and created what he called an atmosphere of rural neglect. I read that sentence 3 times before I laughed so hard I had to sit down. Rural neglect. I had been living rural my whole life, and that was the first time anybody had managed to make it sound like a felony. Still, I did what most people do when they are dealing with someone who clearly has too much time and too little humility. I ignored him. I had apple trees to tend. I had a furnace that made noises like a dying animal every November. I had a daughter named Claire in Fort Wayne who called me every Sunday night and asked if I was eating enough, sleeping enough, and seeing anybody nice, as if a 57-year-old widow had somehow become a teenage girl with bad judgment. I had enough to worry about. Curtis was just noise. At least, that is what I told myself. Then one Tuesday afternoon in late April, he came back with an offer. I was working near the back field, replacing a broken section of fence, when I saw his Buick crawling down my driveway. He stepped out wearing loafers so shiny I could see the sky in them. He carried an envelope. "I thought we might revisit our conversation," he said. "What conversation was that?" I asked. "The possibility of Meadowbrook acquiring your northern acreage." He said it calmly, like we had been discussing it for months. We had not. "You mean the land behind the cider barn?" I said. "Yes. It would allow us to create a greenbelt corridor and improve access around the subdivision." "That land has apple trees on it. Older trees," he said. "Not especially productive ones." I stared at him for a moment. "Do you know how old those trees are?" He shrugged. "I am not an orchard expert." "No," I said. "You are not." He handed me the envelope. Inside was an offer for 6 acres of land. It was low enough that I actually wondered if he had left out a 0 by mistake. Then I realized Curtis did not make mistakes like that. He was testing me. He believed I was tired, alone, behind on repairs, and one bad season away from giving in. He believed that because men like Curtis always mistake grief for weakness. I handed the envelope back to him. "This was Ray's favorite part of the orchard," I said. "He planted those trees himself. You could stack that offer on top of every complaint you have ever sent me, and it still would not buy one branch." Curtis did not smile that time. He looked past me toward the trees, toward the narrow dirt lane running behind the cider barn, toward the creek at the far end of my property. "There are other ways to solve neighborhood problems, Ruth," he said. That was when I started calling him Curtis instead of Mr. Vale. Something about the way he said my name made it feel like he had put a price tag on it. "I am sure there are," I told him. "But none of them involve you coming onto my property again." He got into his Buick, closed the door slowly, and drove away without another word. For the next few weeks, nothing happened. No letters, no complaints, no polished speeches at my mailbox. I should have been relieved, but quiet can have a shape to it. Sometimes it feels peaceful. Other times it feels like a man standing behind you without breathing. Around the middle of May, I started seeing tire tracks near the creek behind my orchard. At first I thought it was kids on dirt bikes, because teenagers in rural Indiana had been making bad decisions on wheels since before I was born. But these tracks were too deep, too wide, and too regular. They belonged to trucks. One morning I found a pile of crushed concrete, broken pipe, and grey dirt dumped near the water. It was not huge, but it did not belong there. The creek ran through the far edge of my land, then curved behind Meadowbrook Landing. I called the county office, and they sent a man named Deputy Diane Mercer from the Sheriff's Department. Diane was about my age, maybe a little older, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, and one of those women who could walk into a room full of loud men and make every one of them lower his voice without saying a word. She had worked with Ray years earlier when he volunteered with the fire department. I had not seen much of her since he died, but when she got out of her county vehicle and saw me standing by the creek, she hugged me before she said hello. "You still look like you could outwork half this county," she said. "Only half?" I asked. "I am trying to be polite." Diane walked the creek line with me, studied the tire tracks, and crouched near the rubble. She picked up a piece of broken drainage pipe and turned it over in her hand. "This came from a construction site," she said. "Probably not from your orchard." "That is comforting," I said. "It should not be." She told me the county had received a few complaints about dumping near the development, but nobody had caught anyone in the act. Then she looked toward the back of Meadowbrook Landing, where I could see the roofs of the newest houses through the trees. "You mind if we use your cider barn one night?" she asked. "For what?" "A little quiet watching." I looked at her. "You mean a stakeout?" Diane grinned. "That word makes it sound more exciting than it is." Mostly it means bad coffee, mosquitoes, and waiting for somebody to do something dumb. You have met Curtis Vale, right? I asked. No, she said, but I am getting the feeling I should. I told her enough to make her raise one eyebrow. Not everything. Just the letters, the land offer, the way he kept talking about a greenbelt corridor that would somehow require part of my orchard. Diane listened without interrupting. Then she said, Ruth, I am not a property lawyer, but I know one thing. Nobody gets to pressure you into giving up land because they would like a prettier view. I nodded. He says it is about the neighborhood. People say all kinds of things when they want something, Diane said. The trick is figuring out what they do when nobody gives it to them. That Friday evening, Diane came back in an unmarked tan Oldsmobile with a county radio, a thermos, and a cooler full of sandwiches that looked like they had survived a flood. She parked behind the cider barn where she could see the dirt lane near the creek. I gave her a key to the old packing shed and told her there was a cot upstairs if she needed it. She smiled and said, You know, this is the closest thing to a vacation I have had in 6 months. I told her she needed a better travel agent. Before she settled in, she handed me a radio handset in case I needed her. Do not use it unless something is wrong, she said. And Ruth? Yes, if Curtis Vale comes by, do not pick a fight. I looked at her. Diane, I am a widow with a bad knee, a broken fence, and a barn that smells like cider vinegar. Picking fights is not in my schedule. She laughed. Good. Keep it that way. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, made coffee, fed the dogs, and walked out to the orchard while the mist was still hanging low between the trees. It was one of those Indiana mornings that makes you forget every bad thing you have ever said about humidity. The birds were loud, the grass was wet, the apple blossoms were just starting to open, pale pink against the grey sky. I remember thinking that maybe I had worried too much about Curtis. Maybe he had moved on to bothering somebody with a blue mailbox or a lawn gnome. Then, around 10:30, my neighbor Marge Bell came up my driveway in a little red Ford Escort. Marge lived in Meadowbrook Landing, but had more sense than most people over there. She was a retired school secretary, a widow herself, and the kind of woman who could deliver a pie and a warning in the same sentence. She got out of her car, holding a foil-covered dish. I brought you peach cobbler, she said, and I brought you trouble. Which one should I open first? I asked. She did not smile. Curtis held an emergency meeting last night. He said your orchard is creating a public safety risk. That is funny, I said. I was just out there checking on the apples. None of them attacked me. Ruth, I am serious. He has people coming over here today. He says the HOA Safety Committee has authority to inspect your buildings if they think there is a risk to Meadowbrook. I looked at her. Authority from who? From Curtis, apparently. That has always been his favorite source. Marge stepped closer and lowered her voice. He showed them some papers. Something about a maintenance easement near the creek. You said he has county support. That made my stomach tighten. I did not know why at the time, but it did. Maybe it was the way she said county support. Maybe it was because Curtis had been too quiet for too long. Or maybe it was because a person who talks about rules all the time rarely needs to invent them. I thanked Marge, took the cobbler, and walked back toward the house. On the porch, I looked out over the front drive, then toward the cider barn, where Diane was still hidden behind the old crates and equipment. I did not call her right away. Instead, I went inside and picked up the phone. I called my daughter Claire. She answered on the third ring, breathless, like I had interrupted something. Mum, everything okay? She said. Probably not, I told her, but I wanted you to hear it from me first. Curtis Vale may be coming over here with some friends. There was a pause. The HOA guy? The very one. Do you want me to come down? No, I want you to stay where you are. I just wanted you to know. Mom? Call the sheriff. There is already a deputy here. Another pause. There is what? It is a long story. You are telling me there is a deputy at the orchard and you are calling that a long story. I am calling it Saturday morning. She sighed the way daughters sigh when they are trying not to sound like their mothers. Please do not do anything reckless. I looked through the window toward the old orchard gate. Claire, I have spent 30 years keeping this place alive. Reckless is not really my style. Then I hung up, walked out to the packing shed, and told Diane what Marge had said. She listened, took off her glasses, and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Do you have any cameras? She asked. I have one in the house. Ray bought it years ago for Christmas. It weighs about as much as a bowling ball. Good enough. Put it in the front window. Tape running. Time and date on. I did that. Then I carried my old JBC camcorder out to the porch and set it on a tripod facing the gate. I had used that camera for birthdays, Christmas mornings, and once for a family reunion where my brother fell into a kiddie pool after 2 beers. I never imagined I would use it to record a man trying to invade my orchard. Diane stayed out of sight. Let him make the first mistake, she said. People like that always do. She was right. At 11:45, I heard engines coming down County Road 12. Not one truck. 3. They turned into my driveway in a cloud of dust, white pickup trucks with magnetic signs on the doors that read, Meadowbrook Safety Patrol. I remember standing on the porch with a mug of coffee in one hand, thinking that somebody had spent money making those signs. And that was when I knew this was not just Curtis trying to scare me. This was theater. He wanted witnesses. He wanted cameras. He wanted people from Meadowbrook to see a widow farmer get put in her place. Curtis got out of the first truck wearing a pale blue shirt, tan pants and sunglasses he probably thought made him look important. Behind him came Glenn Mott, a retired security guard who had apparently mistaken his flashlight for a badge, Curtis's nephew Billy, who was 20-something and looked uncomfortable before he even shut the truck door, and 2 other men from the neighborhood carrying clipboards and a camcorder. There were also half a dozen residents standing near the road watching from behind the fence line. Marge was among them. She looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Curtis walked up to my gate and held up his leather folder. "Mrs. Harper," he called, "this is an official Meadowbrook safety inspection. We're here to assess potential hazards affecting the community." I leaned against the porch post. "Curtis, you are standing on my driveway. Your property borders Meadowbrook Landing," he said. "That creates shared responsibilities." "No," I said. "It creates a fence." He turned to the people with him. "Please document her refusal to cooperate." I could not help myself. "Document this too. I am refusing because you are not law enforcement, you are not county inspectors, and you are not invited." Curtis looked almost pleased. He liked having an audience. He liked being the calm man dealing with an unreasonable woman. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "we have received reports of unsafe storage, possible chemical runoff, and unregistered machinery." "From who?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough for me to enjoy it. "From concerned residents." "You mean from you? I am the association president. That is not an answer." His face hardened. "We have legal grounds to enter if there is a threat to community safety." "Then call the county," I said. "You know, the people with actual legal grounds." Curtis opened the folder and pulled out a folded map. He held it up like he was presenting a winning hand in a card game. "This section near the creek is listed as a maintenance corridor." I looked at the paper from where I stood. It had a thick red line drawn across my northern field. I knew my property maps. Ray and I had studied them more times than I could count. That red line did not belong there. "That map is wrong," I said. "No," Curtis said quietly. "That map is very important." I looked at him, and for the first time I saw something behind all the manners. Not pride, not concern, hunger. He wanted that strip of land. He had wanted it from the beginning. The orchard, the old barn, the alleged hazards, the letters, all of it was just pressure. He did not want my cooperation. He wanted my surrender. "You should leave," I told him. Curtis looked at Glenn Mott. "Open the gate." Glenn shifted his weight. "Curtis, maybe we ought to wait for the county." "The county has already been made aware," Curtis said. "Open the gate." I set down my coffee mug. "Glenn," I said, "that lock is mine. That gate is mine. You cut it, you will answer for it." Glenn looked at Curtis, then at me. He was not a bad man, I do not think. Just a man who had spent too long being told that following the loudest person in the room was the same thing as doing the right thing. Curtis lowered his voice. "Glenn, do your job." And that was when the bolt cutters closed around my chain. Part 2. The turn. Metal makes a very particular sound when it breaks. It is not dramatic the way it is in movies. It is short, sharp, almost disappointing. 1 second the chain holds. The next second it does not. The lock dropped onto the gravel, bounced once, and rolled toward the ditch. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. Even Curtis seemed surprised by how far he had gone. Then he lifted his chin and said, "Proceed." The gate swung inward. Glenn stepped through first, followed by Billy and the others. Curtis came after them, holding his folder against his side like a preacher carrying a Bible. I stayed on the porch. My heart was beating hard, but not because I was afraid of him. I was angry in a way that felt older than anger. It was the kind of anger that comes when somebody puts their dirty hands on something you spent your whole life protecting. That gate had been there since Ray and I bought the land. Ray had welded it himself in 1971 after a storm knocked down the old wooden one. I could still see him standing there in his work gloves, laughing at me because I told him the hinges were crooked. "They are not crooked," he had said. "They are full of character." Curtis did not know any of that. To him, it was just a chain in his way. "Start with the equipment," he said. The men spread out across my yard, pointing at my tractor, the cider press, the old fertilizer shed, the wooden crates stacked near the barn. One of them wrote something on a clipboard. Another man held up the camcorder and filmed slowly, like he was documenting a murder scene. "Rust damage on the tractor," someone said. "Exposed storage materials," another said. "Potential fire hazard," Glenn added, looking at a stack of dry apple crates. I shook my head. "You people ever seen a farm before?" Curtis ignored me. "Check the barn," he said. "And the shed." Billy started toward the cider barn, then looked back at Curtis. "What exactly are we looking for?" "Evidence," Curtis said. "Of what?" Billy asked. Curtis turned toward him. "Of non-compliance." I almost laughed. That was the whole thing with Curtis. He had no idea what he was looking for because he was never looking for a problem. He was looking for a reason. I stepped down from the porch and walked toward them. "You are all trespassing," I said. "Every second you stay here makes it worse." Curtis faced me. "Ruth, you have brought this on yourself. If you had simply cooperated with Meadowbrook, none of this would be necessary." "Cooperated how?" I asked. "By giving you my land? By recognizing that your choices affect the people around you." "My choices?" I said. "I grow apples, Curtis. I sell cider. I keep a barn standing. The people around me are the ones who moved next to an orchard and decided apples were too country for them." He walked closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne over the dust. "You do not understand how this works." "No," I said. "I understand exactly how it works. You want that field behind the barn because it makes your little neighborhood plan easier. And when I would not sell it, you decided you could bully me into giving it away." His jaw tightened. "That is ridiculous. Then why is there a red line on your map that does not exist on mine?" For the first time, Curtis looked uncertain. Just for a second. But I saw it. So did Diane, though I did not know she was watching from the packing shed at that moment. Curtis turned away from me and barked, "Open the barn." The big sliding door to the cider barn was secured with a padlock. Billy walked over and tugged at it. "It is locked," he said. "Of course it is locked," I said. "It is my barn." Curtis took a breath through his nose. "If there are hazardous materials inside, we cannot allow the owner to obstruct an inspection." "You cannot allow it," I repeated. "Curtis, you are a man in khaki pants standing in my orchard with a clipboard. Let us not get carried away." A few people by the road laughed, but Curtis did not hear them. Or maybe he did, and that was why he got meaner. He pointed at the lock. "Cut it." Billy froze. "Uncle Curtis, I do not think that is a good idea." "Cut it," Curtis said again. "You told us this was a county-approved inspection." "It is." "Then why are we cutting locks?" Billy asked. I will give the kid credit. He was scared, but he had reached the place where fear stops you from doing something foolish. Curtis took a step toward him. "Do not embarrass me in front of these people." "You are doing a fine job of that yourself," I said. Curtis swung around and pointed at me. "This is exactly the kind of disrespect I have had to deal with from her for 2 years. She thinks she is above every rule because she has an old farm and a sad story. That hit harder than I expected. I did not cry. I'd cried enough after Ray died to understand that tears do not always mean weakness. But I was not going to give Curtis that satisfaction. Instead, I looked at him and said, "You were right about one thing. I have an old farm. I also have every right in the world to keep it." Then I heard a door creak behind us. The side door of the cider barn opened slowly. Everyone turned. Deputy Diane Mercer stepped out wearing jeans, a brown jacket, and her county badge clipped to her belt. She had one hand resting near her radio and the other holding a manila folder. Behind her came a second officer I did not recognize, a younger deputy named Paul Hernandez, carrying a portable camera and a notepad. Diane did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Nobody move," she said. "Nobody touch another lock. Nobody leaves this property until I figure out why half of Meadowbrook Landing thinks they have the right to break into a private orchard." The silence after that was something I will never forget. Curtis looked at Diane, then at the barn, then back at Diane again. You could almost see his mind trying to arrange the pieces into a story where he still had control. "Deputy Mercer," he said slowly, "I was not aware you were here." "That is because I did not invite you," she said. "We are conducting an emergency safety inspection," Curtis said. "No," Diane replied. "You are conducting yourself toward a criminal trespass charge." He lifted the map. "We have documentation showing a maintenance corridor along the creek." Diane held out her hand. "Let me see that." Curtis did not give it to her right away. That was mistake number 2. Diane looked at him for a moment, then said, "Mr. Vale, hand me the paper." He gave it to her. She unfolded it, studied the red line, then looked over at me. "Ruth, have you ever signed an easement for Meadowbrook Landing?" "No." "Has anyone from the county recorded one?" "No." Diane looked back at Curtis. "Where did you get this map?" Curtis shifted his weight. "It came from the development office." "That is not what I asked." "The development office provided it." Diane held the page up to the light. "This is a photocopy of an old plat map with a line added in marker." Curtis's face changed. "Not much, but enough." Diane turned the map over. In the lower corner there was a faint indentation where somebody had pressed hard with a pen. She looked at Deputy Hernandez. "Take a picture of this. Close up." Curtis stepped forward. "That is not necessary." Diane looked at him. "You are not in charge of what is necessary today." Then she turned to Glenn, who cut the gate lock. Glenn raised his hand slowly. "I did, Mom." "Why?" "Mr. Vale told me we had authority to inspect." Diane nodded. "Did he tell you that you could cut a lock on private property?" Glenn looked toward Curtis. "He said we had county backing." Diane looked at Curtis again. "Did you?" Curtis straightened his shoulders. "The HOA has a duty to protect residents. An HOA has no authority to break into a woman's property because you do not like her barn," Diane said. "You can file complaints. You can call county inspectors. You can hire lawyers. You cannot bring a pretend patrol unit onto private land, damage a gate, and start searching buildings." Curtis raised his voice then. "Pretend patrol unit? We are volunteers." Diane glanced at the magnetic signs of the trucks, the matching reflective vests, the radios, the clipboards, the camera crew. "Volunteers for what? A parade?" Billy took off his reflective vest. "I could not help it." I smiled. It was not kind, maybe, but it was honest. Curtis saw me smiling, and something in him snapped. "You think this is funny?" he shouted. "You think you can hide behind law enforcement forever?" I looked at him. "No, Curtis. I think you thought you could hide behind a clipboard." He came toward me, but Deputy Hernandez stepped between us. Diane touched her radio. "Dispatch, this is Mercer at Cedar Hollow Orchard. I need 2 units of my location. Possible criminal trespass, criminal mischief, and fraudulent property documentation. Repeat, possible fraudulent property documentation." Curtis went pale. "Fraudulent?" he said. "That is a serious accusation." Diane nodded. "So is breaking and entering." The people near the road had stopped whispering. Even the ones who had come to watch me get embarrassed were staring at Curtis now. Marge stepped through the open gate and walked closer. She had her hands clasped tight in front of her. "Curtis," she said, "you told the board the county had approved this." Curtis turned toward her. "Marge, this is not the time." "No," she said, her voice shaking. "I think it is exactly the time. You said Ruth had illegal runoff, that she was storing chemicals near the creek, that people could get hurt. You said we had to act before the county ignored us again." Curtis' face hardened. "You do not understand the full situation." "Apparently none of us did," Marge said. That was the moment the crowd changed. Up until then, some of them had seen me as the difficult old woman with the old orchard, the one who did not keep up with the new neighborhood. But now they were seeing Curtis the way I had seen him for 2 years. Not as a leader, not as a protector, as a man who had decided other people's fear was a tool he could use. The deputies arrived 10 minutes later. 2 county cruisers came down my driveway with lights flashing, kicking dust against the apple trees. It looked ridiculous and terrible all at once. Police cars in an orchard, neighbors lined up by the fence. Curtis Bale standing beside my broken gate with his perfect shirt wrinkled and his hair finally out of place. The officers took statements. They photographed the cut chain, the broken padlock, the tire tracks, the signs on the trucks, the map with the red line. Glenn admitted he had cut the lock because Curtis ordered him to. Billy admitted Curtis had told them the orchard was partly Meadowbrook property. One of the other men said he thought the patrol was working with the county. Curtis kept repeating that it was a misunderstanding. We were trying to protect the community, he said. Diane looked at him and said, "The next time, try protecting it without committing a crime." He did not like that. Nobody likes hearing the truth when they have spent too long polishing their own version of it. I stood there quietly while the deputies worked, and I remember feeling something strange. I expected relief. I expected satisfaction. What I felt was mostly sadness. Not for Curtis, not exactly. For myself. For the fact that I had let him take up so much space in my head. For every night I had checked the gate twice before bed. For every letter I had opened with my hands shaking. For every time I had wondered whether being alone made me easier to push around. Diane came over after Curtis and the others had been separated near the trucks. She handed me my broken lock. "You okay?" she asked. I looked at the bent metal in my hand. "I will be. You want to press charges?" I looked at Curtis. He was standing by his Buick, talking rapidly to one of the deputies. He saw me looking and stopped. "Yes," I said, "I do." Diane nodded. "Good. But Diane," I added, "that map is not just about the gate, is it?" She looked toward the northern field. "No," she said, "I do not think it is." Part 3. The ending. By Monday morning, the story had traveled farther than I could have imagined. This was 1995, so it did not spread through the internet, because most people I knew still thought a modem sounded like a sick robot and nobody had the patience to wait 10 minutes for a picture to load. No, this story spread the old-fashioned way, through kitchen tables, church parking lots, gas stations, grocery store aisles, beauty salons, bowling leagues and the corner booth at Darlene's Diner. Marge had recorded most of the confrontation from across the road on a little handheld camcorder. Her nephew worked at Channel 8 in Fort Wayne, and by Tuesday evening, part of the tape was on the local news. They did not show everything, but they showed enough. They showed the Meadowbrook safety patrol signs. They showed the broken chain. They showed Curtis telling Glenn to cut the lock, and they showed Deputy Diane Mercer stepping out of the cider barn and asking a question that made half the county laugh into their dinner plates. "Exactly who told you this was your property?" The next day, my phone started ringing before 8 in the morning. Some people called to apologize for believing Curtis. Some called to tell me they had always known he was trouble, which is one of those things people say after trouble gets caught. A few called to complain that I had embarrassed Meadowbrook Landing, as if I had personally driven 3 pickup trucks onto my own land and broken into my own barn. I did not argue with them. I had learned by then that you cannot reason a person out of a belief they use to avoid admitting they were wrong. Then, on Thursday afternoon, a man named Harold Pruitt came to see me. I knew Harold by sight. He was the treasurer for Meadowbrook Landing, a quiet retired accountant who wore suspenders and always looked like he had just remembered an unpaid bill. He stood at the bottom of my porch steps holding a cardboard file box against his chest. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "I need to talk to you, if you have a minute." "Depends," I said. "Are you here to inspect my scarecrow?" He looked so nervous that I immediately felt bad. "No, ma'am. I'm here because I think Curtis has been lying to all of us." I invited him in. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Ray used to do crossword puzzles and leave crumbs everywhere. Harold opened the box. Inside were copies of HOA bank statements, invoices, committee minutes, contractor estimates, and several checks made out to a company called Vale Landscape and Drainage Services. I knew the name. Curtis's brother-in-law owned it. "These payments started last year," Harold said. "Curtis said they were for greenbelt improvements, drainage work, trail maintenance, but there is no trail. There is no greenbelt, and every time I asked for proof, he told me the board had approved everything." "Did they?" I asked. Harold gave a humorless little laugh. "The board approved whatever Curtis put in front of us. Most people did not read the details. I should have. I know that now." He pulled out one document and slid it toward me. It was a copy of a maintenance agreement. My name was typed at the top. My property address was listed beneath it. At the bottom was a signature that looked almost like mine, except it was not. The letters were too careful, too round, like someone had tried to copy my handwriting from a Christmas card. I stared at it for a long time. "That is not my signature," I said. "I know," Harold replied. "I compared it to the old HOA correspondence. Curtis used this agreement to justify payments for access work along your creek line. He told the board Meadowbrook had maintenance rights through your orchard." My hands went cold. Suddenly the map at my gate made sense. The fake red line, the pressure to buy the field, the endless letters calling my orchard a hazard. Curtis had not just wanted the land, he had been using it on paper. He had been charging his own neighbors for improvements on property he did not own, using a fake easement he thought nobody would question. I looked at Harold. "Why bring this to me?" He looked down at his hands. "Because I signed some of those checks." There was shame in his voice, real shame. I told myself it was not my job to question Curtis. I told myself he was just difficult, not dishonest. But after Saturday, after I saw what he did to you, I realized I had been helping him hurt people. I did not know what to say, so I poured him coffee. Sometimes that is all you can do when somebody brings you the truth too late. We called Diane. She came over within 30 minutes, sat at my kitchen table, and went through every document in silence. Then she picked up the forged agreement and looked at me. "Ruth," she said, "this is bigger than the gate." I nodded. I figured. What followed took weeks. Not movie weeks where the police snap their fingers and every secret falls out of a drawer. Real weeks. Paperwork weeks. Phone call weeks. Weeks of people suddenly remembering things they should have asked about sooner. Diane brought in the county prosecutor. The prosecutor brought in an investigator from the state. They traced the payments from Meadowbrook's reserve account to Vale Landscape and Drainage Services, then from there into accounts tied to Curtis and his brother-in-law. They found invoices for drainage work that had never been done, repairs to a community trail that had never existed, and maintenance charges for the creek corridor Curtis had invented on paper. They found out the piles of concrete and pipe dumped near my creek had come from a construction project paid for by Meadowbrook residents. Curtis had billed the HOA for proper disposal, then had the debris dumped behind my orchard after dark. That was why Diane had been watching Cider Barn in the first place. He was not just trying to take my land, he was trying to hide his mess on it. The irony would have been funny if it had not been so ugly. The man who sent me letters about rural neglect had been dumping construction waste near my creek. The man who called my tractor an eyesore had been billing his neighbors for landscaping that never happened. The man who talked about protecting property values had been stealing from the people who trusted him to protect them. Still, I will tell you something honest. Even after all that, I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired. There is a strange kind of exhaustion that comes when you finally realize you were right about someone. Part of you wants to be vindicated, but another part wishes you had been wrong. I wished Curtis had just been a difficult man with a big ego. I wished he had stopped at the letters. I wished he had never looked at my orchard and seen an opportunity. But wishing does not change what people choose to do. In early July, Meadowbrook held a special homeowners meeting at the clubhouse. Curtis called it himself, which was almost impressive in its own way. By then he knew there were questions, but he must have thought he could still talk his way through them. That was his greatest talent. Curtis could make selfishness sound like responsibility. He could make control sound like concern. He could make a lie sound respectable as long as he said it slowly enough. Marge called me the afternoon of the meeting. "You should come," she said. "I do not belong to Meadowbrook," I told her. "No," she said, "but somehow it all became about you." I almost said no. I wanted to stay home. I wanted to water the orchard, make dinner, and pretend other people's problems had nothing to do with me. But there are times in life when you need to see the last page of a story with your own eyes. So I put on a clean blouse, tied my hair back, and drove over in Ray's old truck. The Meadowbrook clubhouse was full when I arrived. People were sitting in folding chairs, standing along the walls, whispering in corners. Curtis stood at the front near a large easel with a poster board that said Meadowbrook Forward. He had cleaned himself up, put on a dark blazer, and somehow managed to look exactly like a man trying to sell a timeshare after losing a lawsuit. He saw me walk in, and for a moment his face went still. Then he smiled. "Mrs. Harper," he said into the microphone, "I am glad you could join us." I did not answer. I sat in the back beside Marge. Curtis began talking about community unity. He talked about outside forces attacking Meadowbrook. He talked about misunderstandings, unfair accusations, and the importance of not allowing one isolated incident to distract from the association's long-term goals. He never said the word trespass. He never said the word forgery. He never said my name again. Then Harold stood up. He had no suspenders that night. Just a white shirt, a tie, and a stack of copied financial records in his hands. "I have a question," he said. Curtis smiled tightly. "Of course, Harold. Can you explain why Meadowbrook paid Vale Landscape and Drainage Services $87,000 for a creek maintenance corridor that does not exist?" The room changed. You could feel it, like a storm moving through the walls. Curtis looked at Harold, and for the first time I saw fear in him. "That is a complicated matter," he said. "No," Harold replied. "It is actually very simple. Did you forge Ruth Harper's signature on a maintenance agreement?" Curtis grabbed the microphone stand. "I will not be publicly accused by a disgruntled former treasurer." Harold did not sit down. "Then answer the question." Curtis looked around the room, searching for support. He did not find much. Some people looked down. Some looked angry. Some looked embarrassed. Marge was crying quietly beside me, not because she loved Curtis, I think, but because she had believed in the idea of their little community and had watched him turn it into something ugly. Then the front doors opened. Deputy Diane Mercer walked in with 2 state investigators and a county prosecutor. She was wearing her uniform that night, badge polished, hair pulled back, and that same calm look she had worn when she stepped out of my cider barn. Curtis stared at her. "You cannot do this here," he said. Diane stopped a few feet from him. "You invited the community," she said. "They deserve to hear what happened to their money." The room went so quiet I could hear the air conditioner humming. The prosecutor read the charges: theft by deception, forgery, falsifying property documents, illegal dumping, conspiracy related to fraudulent contractor payments. Curtis's brother-in-law had already been picked up earlier that day. The investigators had bank records, the forged agreement, invoices, copies of checks, and enough witness statements to make Curtis's old folder look like a child's school project. He kept shaking his head. "This is political," he said. "This is retaliation because I tried to address a dangerous property." Diane looked at him for a long moment. "Curtis, you did not address a dangerous property. You tried to take advantage of a woman you thought would not fight back." He looked at me then. Really looked at me. Maybe for the first time. There was no charm left in his face, no polished calm, just anger and disbelief. "You ruined everything," he said. I stood up slowly. My knees hurt, my hands were shaking. But my voice did not. "No, Curtis," I said. "You did that when you decided everybody else's home was something you could use." He opened his mouth, but he had nothing left to say. The officers placed him under arrest in front of the whole room. Nobody cheered. This was not that kind of moment. Real life rarely gives you a clean soundtrack and a crowd that knows exactly when to clap. Mostly people sat there in silence, watching a man who had spent years telling them what was best for them get led out through the same doors he had walked through like he owned the place. I watched him go, and I thought about that broken lock in my hand. I thought about Ray. I thought about every apple tree in the northern field, everyone planted with bare hands and hope. And I realized something I had not understood before. Standing your ground does not always look brave while you are doing it. Most of the time it feels like fear. It feels like being tired. It feels like wanting to give up but deciding not to because the alternative would hurt worse. Curtis eventually took a plea deal. The newspaper said he could serve several years, though by then I had stopped reading every update. Meadowbrook Landing dissolved its old association and rebuilt it from scratch. They started a small volunteer neighborhood committee with no fake patrol signs, no made-up authority, and no red lines drawn across other people's property. Harold helped clean up the books. Marge organized food drives and community dinners. Some of the people who had stood by my gate that Saturday came to the orchard that fall with their families. They bought cider. They picked apples. A few apologized. A few did not. That was all right. You cannot force people to understand what they were part of. You can only decide what you are going to do with the rest of your life. I replaced the chain on my gate. I repaired the fence. I did clean up the old fertilizer shed because, to be fair, it needed work, and I was not too proud to admit that. The county helped get the dump debris removed from the creek. Diane came by one afternoon after everything had settled down, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. We sat on my porch and watched the leaves turn gold at the edge of the orchard. "You know," she said, "Curtis was wrong about almost everything, but he was right about one thing." I looked at her. "What was that?" She nodded toward the barn. "That place has character." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. A month later, Claire came down from Fort Wayne and brought her husband and my grandson, Tommy. He was 6 years old then, all knees and questions. He ran through the orchard wearing Ray's old baseball cap, which was too big for his head, and he stopped near the gate. "Grandma," he asked, "why is that old lock hanging in the barn?" I looked over at the workbench where I had nailed it to the wall. Bent, rusted, useless. "That," I told him, "is a reminder." "Of what?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment. "That some people think a fence is there to keep them out," I said. "But sometimes it is there to remind them where they should have stopped." Now I know some people will hear this story and say Curtis had a right to worry about the creek, the barn, the traffic near my apple stand, and maybe they are right about part of that. Maybe I should have repaired the shed sooner. Maybe I should have put a brighter sign near the driveway. Maybe I was not always easy to deal with. I have never claimed to be perfect. But concern does not give anyone the right to force their way into your life. Rules do not become law just because somebody prints them on nice paper. And the community is not a place where the loudest person gets to decide what belongs to everyone else. So I want to ask you this. Was Curtis just trying to protect Meadowbrook Landing, or was he using fear and paperwork to take what was never his? Was I right to press charges, or should I have let it end with a broken gate and the public embarrassment? Tell me what you think in the comments, because I have learned that people see boundaries very differently when they are standing on the other side of the fence. And if this story reminded you of someone who believes a title gives them the right to control everyone around them, share it with them. Then subscribe for more stories about ordinary people who learned that the quietest voice in the room is not always the weakest one.